That one couldn't ride to save his life, the man in the cream breeches said, loud enough for the whole paddock to hear, and he pointed his crop at one of my guardsmen the way you'd point at a fence post. I was 3 steps away in plain dress, close enough to watch the insult land, and Trooper Halloran did not so much as blink. He stood at the rail in his off-duty greatcoat, hands folded, eyes level on the schooling ring, while a half-dozen of the county riding set laughed the easy laugh of people who have never once been told no. I am Captain Edmund Royce, and I have commanded men at the King's stables and gates for 19 years. I have learned to read a paddock the way other men read a room. And what I read that morning, before a single horse had cantered, was a crowd of expensively dressed people who had decided that a man in a plain coat, standing quietly at the edge of their world, was beneath them. They were wrong in a way they could not yet imagine. But I am getting ahead of the morning, and the morning is where this has to start. It was the Westmark Charity Cup, a fictional name for a real enough thing, a once-a-year affair held on the long green field behind the old mews, where the households, riding clubs, and the county gentry mix for an afternoon to raise money for the Veterans Fund. There is a procession, a few exhibition rounds, and the headline event, a cross-country and show-jumping pursuit over the Mews course for an old silver trophy called the Westmark Plate. The plate has 100 years of names cut into its base. Most of the county set could recite them. Not one of them that morning had read all the way down. I had brought 4 men in plain dress to help marshal the crowd and lend a hand at the rails, Halloran among them. He was a quiet man, broad through the shoulders, gray coming in early at his temples though he was not yet 40. He had transferred into my detachment 2 years back from a cavalry regiment, and he kept to himself the way the best ones do. I knew 3 things about his past and no more: that he had ridden, that he had served abroad, and that he never once volunteered a word about either. When I'd asked the first month, he'd said only, "It was a long time ago, sir," and I had let it lie. A man's silences are his own. The cream-breeches man was named on his number bib as Mr. Caldwell Voss, and he carried himself like a name everyone ought to know. He had 2 matched bays in the stalls, a groom for each, and a circle of admirers who laughed when he laughed. His sister Lavinia rode too, in a habit that probably cost more than my month's pay, and she had a tongue that cut quicker than his. The pair of them ran the county riding set the way a small king runs a small country, by deciding who is in and who is furniture. Halloran to them was furniture. It started small, the way these things do. Halloran had stepped in to steady a young rider's horse at the mounting block, a girl of 16 on a green 4-year-old that had taken fright at the band. He had it by the cheekpiece and a hand on its neck before I'd even seen it shy, and he talked it down in that low, even voice good horsemen have, and the girl kept her seat, and it was over in 10 seconds. Caldwell Voss watched the whole thing and decided he did not like a plain coat handling a horse in his paddock. "You can let go now," Voss said, strolling up. "We have grooms for that." "Yes, sir," Halloran said, and let go and stepped back to the rail. That should have been the end of it, but men like Voss cannot leave a thing alone once they've noticed it. He looked Halloran up and down, the plain coat, the worn boots, the gray at the temples, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he's found something to amuse his friends with. "Have you ridden, then?" Voss asked. "Properly, I mean. Not led a pony round a paddock." "A little, sir," Halloran said. "A little?" Voss turned to his circle, delighted. "He's ridden a little." And that was when he said it, the line that started the whole thing, the line I keep coming back to. That one couldn't ride to save his life. Look at him. They give them a uniform and a fence to stand at, and they think they're cavalry. He laughed, and the cream-breeches set laughed with him, and Lavinia Voss said, sweet as poison, "Be kind, Caldy. Perhaps he's very good at standing still." Halloran stood still. I will tell you what I felt watching it, because it matters to the rest. I felt the old heat come up my neck, the officer's instinct to step in, to say a word, to put a name and a record against the man's mouth and watch the smile fall off him. I knew what Halloran was, or I knew the shape of it. I could have ended it in one sentence, and I will be honest, I almost did. But I had served beside men like Halloran long enough to know that the worst thing you can do for a man of that kind is fight his quiet for him. His silence was not weakness. It was a held thing, deliberate, the way a man holds a horse on a tight rein going into a turn, all the power there, none of it spent. To rush in and spend it for him would have robbed him of the one thing that made him what he was. So I held my own tongue, which is harder than it sounds, and I watched, and I waited to see what the morning would make of Caldwell Voss. What the morning made of him was worse, before it was better. Because Voss, having found his sport, would not put it down. Through the morning rounds he kept circling back to the rail where Halloran stood, dropping a remark each time like a man feeding a fire. When a competitor had a refusal at the water jump, even our friend here could have made that one. Oh no, he couldn't, could he? When the band struck up, mind the noise doesn't spook you, trooper. Each time Halloran answered with nothing or with sir, and stepped no closer and no farther, and each time the set laughed a little less, because cruelty without a flinch to feed on goes stale fast. I noticed something they did not. I noticed that every time Voss spoke, Halloran's eyes went not to the man but to the field, to the Mews course laid out beyond the rail, the brush fences and the spread, the bank and the ditch and the long galloping stretched down to the silver birch where the course turned for home. He read it the way a man reads a letter he has read before. And once, only once, when Voss said the word cavalry like a slur, I saw the corner of Halloran's mouth move. Not a smile, the memory of one. That was the first thing that told me the morning was not going to end the way Caldwell Voss thought it would. The second thing came at noon, when the steward of the plate, an old fellow named Mr. Penhallow, who had run the Westmark Cup for 30 years, came down the rail with his clipboard and his list of riders, counting heads, and stopped dead when he came level with the plain coat at the fence. He looked at Halloran. He looked again, and the color went slowly out of the old man's face the way water drains from a glass. "It can't be," Penhallow said softly. "I'd have heard. Surely I'd have heard." "Mr. Penhallow," Halloran said, and inclined his head the smallest courtesy. "It's good to see you, sir." The old steward's hand came up to his own mouth. Behind us, Caldwell Voss was laughing at something, that bright, careless laugh, with no idea at all that the steward of the cup he meant to win had just gone white as chalk at the sight of a man in a borrowed coat. And I stood between the two of them, the laughing man and the white-faced one, and I understood all at once that I had brought to this charity afternoon something none of these people had any way to expect, and that the morning's small cruelties had just become a debt that was going to be paid in full. I just didn't yet know how completely. Penhallow drew me aside by the elbow away from the rail, and his voice when he found it was low and unsteady. "Captain Royce, that man at your fence, do you know who that is?" "He's one of mine," I said. "Trooper Halloran, plain dressed today, lending a hand." "Halloran." The old man said the name as if testing whether it would hold his weight, and he said nothing, to you, to anyone. "He's not a man for saying," I told him. Penhallow looked back down the rail, at the broad, gray-templed figure standing quiet at the fence, and something moved behind his eyes that I would call reverence if the word weren't too large for a paddock on a charity afternoon. "Come," he said. "Come and look at the plate. I want to show you something, and then you'll understand why my hands are shaking." He led me to the steward's tent, where the old silver trophy sat on its dark cloth, polished till it threw the light. The Westmark plate, a wide-footed bowl, dented and lovely, with 100 years of names cut in spirals down its base, the winners, year by year, of the hardest cross-country course in the household's calendar. Penhallow turned it slow with both hands, the way you'd turn something holy, until the engraving he wanted came round to face the light. And there it was, a name cut clean, 11 years old by the date beside it. I will not give you the regiment or the full honor that went with it. Those things are kept close, and a man like Halloran would not thank me for spilling them on a page. But I will tell you what the plate said, plainly. It said that 11 years before, the Westmark Cup, this same Mews course, the brush and the bank and the ditch and the long gallop to the birch, had been won, in record time, over a fall that should have ended his ride and didn't, by a young cavalryman of the Household Mounted Division. A man who had gone on, the next year, to ride for the whole household at the international level, and then to a service abroad that the public was never told about, and then, quietly, after a wound that the public was never told about either, home, to a plain coat and a fence and a fresh start in a captain's detachment, where no one would ask and he would never tell. The name on the cup was Halloran. He set the course record on that ride, Penhallow said, and his voice cracked on it. 11 years ago. It still stands. Every rider out there today is chasing a time that man set when he was 26, and he's standing at my rail in a borrowed coat being told he couldn't ride to save his life. The old steward shut his eyes. I have run this cup for 30 years, Captain. The man at your fence is the finest horseman I have ever watched go round that course, and those people are laughing at him. I stood there a long moment with the cold running through me, and I will tell you the truth of what I felt. It was not triumph. It was something closer to shame, that I had let the morning's cruelty run as long as it had, that I had told myself Halloran's silence was his to keep while men with soft hands and loud mouths made sport of a record holder at his own course. I am a disciplined man. I believe in restraint. But there is a line between restraint and letting a good man be made a fool of, and I had been walking very close to the wrong side of it. Does he know, I asked, that you've recognized him? He greeted me by name, Penhallow said. He knows. Then why, I said, is he still at the rail? The old man looked at me as if the answer were obvious, and perhaps to him it was. Because he didn't come here to win anything, Captain. He came to hold a girl's pony at the mounting block and marshal your crowd and stand quietly at a fence. The cup is theirs to chase. He had his turn. Penhallow set the plate down gently on its cloth. A man who has truly done a thing has nothing left to prove to a man who only talks about it. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. But the morning was not finished with Caldwell Voss, and Voss was not finished with the morning. When I came back out from the steward's tent, the cream-breeches set had found a new game. One of Voss's matched bays had gone lame in the off-fore overnight, a stone bruise, the farrier said, nothing serious, but it put the horse out of the plate. And Voss, who had entered both bays meaning to take the cup himself, was now a horse short of his ambition and in a foul, bright, dangerous humor. That was when he made his mistake. The mistake that turned a morning of small cruelties into the thing I am writing down. He came down the rail, his circle trailing, and he stopped square in front of Halloran, and he did the thing that men of his kind do when they want to be cruel but call it generous. He offered a gift designed to humiliate. "Trooper," Voss said loud, so the whole paddock could hear, "I find myself a rider short. And here you stand, telling me you've ridden a little." The set tittered. "So here's my sport. I'll lend you my second bay, sound as a bell, the best blood in the county. You'll ride him in the plate this afternoon over the Mews course, the real course, mind, brush and bank and ditch, not a paddock. And we'll all watch how a man who's ridden a little gets on." He spread his hands wide. "What do you say, or will you stand at your fence?" It was a trap, plain and ugly. He expected one of two things: that Halloran would refuse and be branded a coward in front of everyone, or that he would accept and make a clumsy fool of himself over fences built for the best riders in the county. Either way, Voss won his laugh. Either way, the plain coat was put in his place. The set knew it too. I saw the cruel anticipation move through them like a draft. And Mr. Penhallow, beside me, drew a breath to speak, to end it, to name the name on the cup, to bring the whole thing crashing down on Caldwell Voss's head right there at the rail. I caught the old steward's sleeve. "Wait," I said very low, "let him answer." Because I had seen Halloran's eyes go to the course again. Not to Voss. To the field, the brush, the bank, the long gallop to the birch. And I had seen, for the second time that day, the corner of his mouth move at the word that men kept throwing at him like a stone. Halloran was quiet for what felt like a long time. The paddock waited. The band had stopped between numbers, and you could hear the horses shifting in the stalls and a flag snapping somewhere on its pole. Then he looked at Caldwell Voss, level and easy, with no heat in it at all, and he said the first full sentence I had heard him speak all day. "I'll ride him," Halloran said, "but not your bay." Voss blinked. "Not what do you mean, not my bay? It's the best horse on the field." "It's a good horse," Halloran agreed. "But he doesn't know me and I don't know him, and that course is no place to learn a stranger." He turned his head, unhurried, and looked across the paddock to a far stall where a plain, dark gelding stood, an older horse, unfashionable, 16 and raw-boned, brought along by one of the veterans' grooms to give rides to children between the rounds. "I'll ride that one, if his owner permits." The set laughed outright now, laughed in relief, because surely this settled it. Surely the plain coat had just chosen the plain old pensioner over the best blood in the county and sealed his own embarrassment. "You'd ride the children's nag," Lavinia Voss cried, delighted. "Over the Mews course. Oh, you must, you simply must." "I'd be glad to," Halloran said. And Mr. Penhallow, beside me, let out a breath like a man who has just watched a door open onto something he has waited 11 years to see, and he murmured, so only I could hear it, "He's choosing the old horse on purpose. He's not here to win their cup, Captain. He's here to remind them what it's for." I did not fully understand him yet, but I was beginning to. The old gelding's name was Sargent. He belonged to a quiet groom named Mrs. Aldous who minded the veteran's stalls, and when Halloran walked over and asked her permission, hat in hand, plain and courteous, she looked up at him and then at the men laughing at the rail, and something in her own face hardened on his side. "He's got no flash left in him," she said, "but he's honest. He'll give you everything he's got. You take care of him out there." "I will," Halloran said, "on my honor." I watched him with the horse, and that was when I stopped having any doubt about how the afternoon would end. A man can fake a seat for a length or two. He cannot fake the way a horse comes to him. Halloran put a hand flat on the gelding's neck and stood, just stood, breathing slow, until the old animal turned its head and breath back at him, and the two of them came to an understanding I could not hear a word of. He checked the girth himself and the bit, and ran a thumb under the brow bend, and lifted each hoof in turn with the unthinking sureness of a man who has done it 10,000 times. The grooms watched him. Mrs. Aldous watched him. Old Sargent, who had given dull, safe walks to nervous children all morning, lifted his head and pricked his ears and seemed, somehow, to grow an inch at the withers. "He hasn't ridden in years," I heard one of the county men say to another. "Look at the coat on him. He's no athlete." "He's a stable hand," the other said. "Watch him fall off at the bank." I let them talk. I was watching Halloran's hands. While they tacked up, Penhallow came to me with a problem on his face. "Captain, I'm bound to a difficulty. The man's name is on the cup. He's a former champion of this very course, the record holder. By the letter of the rules, a past plate winner can't ride for the cup again. It's an open amateur event, and he's beyond amateur, he's history." The old steward worked his hands together. "But Voss has issued the challenge in front of the whole field, and the man's accepted, and to forbid it now would look like fear. Like we knew. Like we were protecting the cup from him." "Then let him ride," I said, "but not for the plate. Let him ride as an exhibition. After the field has gone, before the cup is given, a single round the old way, just the man and the course. No prize, no place, nothing to win." I looked at him. "You said it yourself, Penhallow, he's not here to take their cup, so don't let him. Let him do the only thing that's left, which is show them what the cup is supposed to mean." Penhallow's eyes went bright. "An honor round," he said. "We've not run one in 20 years. And he went off to make it so, and I will tell you, The steward of the Westmark Cup walked with a younger man's step than he'd had all morning. The plate itself, when it ran, was a fine event, and I'll not slow to dwell on it. 11 riders went out over the Mews course in pursuit, the county's best, Caldwell Voss among them on his remaining sound horse, riding hard and well. I'll give him that. He could ride, which made his mouth all the worse. He went clear to the bank and clear at the ditch, and was second fastest over the line, beaten by a slip of a girl on a clever chestnut who took the long gallop to the birch like she was born on it. Voss came back to the paddock flushed and furious at his second place, slapping his crop against his boot, looking for somewhere to put the temper. He found the rail. He found the plain coat, except the plain coat wasn't standing at the rail anymore. The plain coat was up on the children's gelding in the collecting ring, sitting quiet, waiting his turn. "Still going through with your little show?" Voss called over. "After what you just watched, those are the best riders in 3 counties, trooper. You're going to take that decrepit pony round the same course and embarrass yourself in front of all of them." He was loud and ugly with it, and the temper had burned away whatever charm he'd had. "I'll tell you what, a wager. If you make it round clear, mind, not a rail down, not a refusal, I'll write the Veterans Fund a check for 10,000. And when you don't, you'll stand at that rail and tell everyone here, out loud, that you've no business near a horse. Deal." The paddock had gone quiet. This was no longer sport. This was a powerful man trying to break a quiet one in public, and everyone could feel it. Halloran walked the old gelding 2 slow steps toward him. He looked down at Caldwell Voss from the saddle, and for the first time all day there was something in his face that was not patience. It was not anger either. I have only ever seen it on men who have been to the far places and come back, a kind of level, unhurried wait, the look of a man for whom this paddock and this wager and this loud-mouthed gentleman were very, very small. "Write the check," Halloran said, "whatever I do. Whatever you. For the Veterans Fund. Write it whether I go clear or fall at the first. Those men earned it, I didn't. That's the only wager I'll take." He gathered the reins. "And I'll make you no promise about clear or not clear. I'll promise you one thing only. I'll bring this old horse home sound the way I told his owner I would. The rest belongs to him." And he reached down and laid his hand once on the gelding's neck. Penhallow's voice came over the field then on the steward's bell, calling the strangest announcement that Charity Afternoon had ever heard. That before the plate was awarded, the field would stand witness to an honor round, a single exhibition over the full Mews course, ridden by a man whose name was already cut into the cup. He did not say which name. He did not have to. The county set went still, frowning, beginning at last to feel the ground shift under them. Lavinia Voss looked at her brother. Her brother looked at the steward's tent, at the cup on its dark cloth, and the first crack of doubt showed in his bright, careless face. "Whose name?" Voss said to no one. "Whose name is on the cup?" Nobody answered him. The bell rang again, and out in the collecting ring, the man they had laughed at all morning turned the old children's gelding toward the start of the hardest course in the household's calendar, and quietly, without ceremony, picked up a canter. I had watched 1,000 riders go to a start. I have never, before or since, watched one go like that. There was no fuss in it, no flourish, nothing for the crowd. He simply folded into the horse the way water folds into a riverbed, found the rhythm in 3 strides, and pointed the old gelding at the first brush fence as if the two of them had been doing this together for 20 years. The reins were soft. The old horse's ears were forward. And the change that came over Sargent, the dull, kind, 16-year-old children's pony, was the thing that made the laughter die in the county set's throats all at once. Because the old horse came alive. I want to set down what I saw, because words on a page are all I have to give it, and it deserves better than I can manage. The Mews course is not a forgiving thing. It begins with 3 brush fences down a slope, and a horse that gets the slope wrong arrives at the 3rd fence on its forehand and stops or falls. The county riders had fought that slope all afternoon, checking, gathering, hauling. Halloran did not fight it. He sat still, and let the old gelding find its own balance going down. Only the faintest shift of his weight to say where the fences were, and Sergeant flowed over the 3 brushes like one long breath, and came off the bottom of the slope gathered and bright and asking for more. The crowd made a sound. Not a cheer, they didn't understand yet what they were watching. A kind of intake, the sound a room makes when a thing it expected to fail does not. Then the bank. The bank is where the plate is won and lost. A great earthen rampart you must jump up onto, take a stride across the top, and drop off the far side into nothing you can see from the approach. Horses balk at the drop. Riders lose their nerve and the grab unbalances the horse, and down they come in a heap. Voss had taken it well that morning, and been proud of it. I watched Halloran come at the bank on the old gelding, and I felt my own breath stop, because the children's pony had surely never seen such a thing in its honest, dull life. Halloran rode the last 3 strides into the bank without moving a muscle I could see. He gave the old horse the contact it needed and not 1 ounce more. And at the lip, where every other rider had looked down and frozen, Halloran looked up, chin lifted, eyes on the far birch, telling the horse with his whole body that there was nothing to fear, that the ground would be there, that he had it. And the old gelding believed him. It dropped off the bank in a long, clean arc with its ears pricked forward and landed running. And the man in the plain coat sat the drop as if he were sitting in an armchair. And I heard Mrs. Aldous beside me make a small broken sound and press both hands to her mouth. That was when the county set understood. You could see it move through them, the awful slow turning of it. Lavinia Voss had stopped smiling some fences back. Now she stood with her gloved hand at her throat. The men who had said watch him fall off at the bank were silent, their faces gone strange and pale. And Caldwell Voss stood at the rail with his crop hanging slack in his hand, and watched the man he had called a stable hand ride the children's pony over a course that had bested the best riders in 3 counties, as if the course were a thing built for his pleasure. There is a place in the middle of the mews where the course turns through a copse, out of sight of the paddock, and runs along the old garrison wall before it comes back into view at the water. For perhaps 15 seconds the rider is hidden. The crowd held its breath in those 15 seconds the way you hold your breath for someone gone underwater. And when horse and man came back into the light at the water jump, the wide spread of it, the fence that had stopped 2 riders cold that morning, they came at a gallop, true and square, and the old gelding stood off it and jumped the water with a foot to spare, and the sun caught them at the top of the arc, the plain coat and the unfashionable horse, and the whole field of fine people who had laughed at him in the morning rose to their feet without deciding to. I have stood at state ceremonies and heard 1,000 voices cheer the king. I have heard the great roar go up at the changing of the guard. I tell you the sound that went up at the water jump was different from any of them, because it was not a sound people had planned to make. It was torn out of them. It was the sound of a crowd watching a thing they had been wrong about, watching it be magnificent, and having no choice but to honor it. Down the long gallop to the birch he came. This is the stretch where the course record is made or lost, 400 yards of open turf, where a great horse can run and a tired one falls away. The girl on the clever chestnut had flown it that morning and taken the plate by it. And the old children's gelding, 16 years old, who had given dull, safe walks to frightened little ones all that morning, laid his ears flat and stretched out his neck and ran with the whole honest heart Mrs. Aldous had promised, ran as if the man on his back had reached down somewhere inside him and found the colt he had been before the years took it. Halloran sat dead still and let him run. He did not ask for the record. I am certain of that, looking back. He asked for nothing. He simply gave the old horse the gift of being ridden once by a man who knew exactly what he was, and the old horse gave back everything it had. They came over the last fence, a single upright brush before the birch turned for home, clean, soft, unhurried, and Halloran sat up and gathered the gelding back to a canter, then a trot, then a walk, The way you bring a great effort down gently so it doesn't break the animal that made it. He did not throw up a fist. He did not look to the crowd. He leaned forward over the old horse's neck, and I saw his lips move. And though I could not hear it, Mrs. Aldous, who was closer, told me afterward what he said. He said, "Good lad, good old lad, there you are." And the field went mad. Penhallow was at the timing post, and the old steward stood there with the watch in his shaking hand, and he did not call out a number. He came walking back into the paddock instead, straight through the standing crowd, straight to where I stood, and his eyes were wet, and he said, "Within a second, Captain, within a second of his own record, on the children's pony, after 11 years and a wound that should have ended him." He shook his head slowly. "I told you." The finest horseman I have ever watched go round that course, and he gave it to that old horse and asked for nothing. I looked for Caldwell Voss. I found him at the rail where he had stood all morning to do his laughing, and he was not laughing now. He was a man who had built a small kingdom on the certainty that he could measure the worth of any person in the time it took to look them up and down, and who had just watched that certainty ridden into the ground and left there. He looked, for the first time since I'd laid eyes on him, like a man who did not know what to do with his own hands. Halloran rode the old gelding back into the collecting ring at a loose walk, dropped the reins, and slid down off its back light as a leaf. He did not go to the crowd. He went to its head and stroked its neck, and led it himself to where Mrs. Aldous stood weeping into her apron, and he put the reins gently into her hands and said something to her I was not close enough to hear. Then he turned, and the standing crowd was facing him, hundreds of them, the fine county people and the grooms and the veterans and the children, all of them on their feet and roaring, and Trooper Halloran stood in the middle of it in his borrowed coat, and did the only thing he knew how to do in the face of a thing too large to answer. He came to attention, and he saluted them, the crowd, the old horse, the course, all of it. And then, because the noise would not stop, and a quiet man can only stand so much of being looked at, he found my eye across the heads of all those people, and he gave me the smallest nod. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to be done now," and I nodded back. And he stepped out of the ring the way he had stepped into it, without a flourish, a plain man in a plain coat, leaving a field full of the county's finest standing and shouting his name when not one of them, an hour before, had bothered to learn it. But the afternoon was not quite over. There was still the matter of the man who had started it, and there was still the cup. Penhallow gathered the field for the awarding of the plate, and the girl on the clever chestnut came forward to take it, blushing and proud, and she deserved it. She had ridden a fine round and won it fair. But before he gave it to her, the old steward did something I think he had been waiting 30 years to do. He turned the cup so its base faced the crowd, and he asked one of the grooms to bring a lamp, and he held the silver up into the light so the names cut into it could be read. "Every year," Penhallow said, and his voice carried clean across the hushed field, "we give this cup and we forget to read it. 100 years of names. I want to read you one." He set his finger against the engraving 11 years old, and he read the name aloud, Halloran's name and the date, and the words cut beside it, "Course Record, the Mews." And then he said simply, "That record stood this morning. It stands tonight. The man who said it stood at your rail today in a borrowed coat, and you told him he couldn't ride to save his life." The old man let the silence do its work. He could have told you who he was at the first word. He told you nothing. He held a frightened girl's pony at the mounting block instead, and marshaled your crowd, and let you laugh. That is the man whose name is on the cup you came to chase. I have been at a great many ceremonies. I have never seen a crowd of proud people made so small so quietly. There was no jeering. There was something better than jeering, which was shame, honest shame, the kind that changes a person if they let it. And I watched Caldwell Voss stand in the middle of it and feel every eye that was not on the cup turn slowly toward him. He did the thing I did not expect. I will set it down because it matters, and because a story in which the arrogant man simply gets what's coming and slinks off is a smaller story than the truth was. Voss walked out into the open. He was pale, and his jaw was tight, and the bright, careless thing he had worn all morning was gone off him entirely. He found Halloran at the edge of the collecting ring, still in his plain coat, still quiet, and he stopped in front of him the way he had stopped in front of him at the rail that morning. Except this time there was no crop, and no circle laughing behind him, and no certainty at all. "I owe you," Voss began and stopped because the sentence was too big. He started again. "I said you couldn't ride to save your life in front of everyone. I'd like to take it back in front of everyone, but a man can't take a thing like that back, so I'll only say I was wrong. I was wrong about you in every way a man can be wrong." He swallowed. "Will you tell me your name, properly? I never asked it." "Halloran," the trooper said, and put out his hand. "It's no matter, sir." "It's every matter," Voss said, and took the hand and held it. Then he turned to Penhallow and the cup in the watching field, and he said loud, the way he had said his cruel things loud all morning, except this was the opposite of cruel. "I made a wager this man wouldn't go clear. He went round better than any of us, on a horse the rest of you wouldn't have looked at twice. The check's for the Veterans Fund. I'm doubling it. And I'd be obliged," his voice caught, "if someone would teach me to ride the way he just did, because I've been calling myself a horseman my whole life, and I've never once ridden like a man who knew what the horse was worth." It was not a perfect speech, but it was an honest one, dragged out of a man who had built his whole life on never having to make it, and the field knew the difference and let it land. His sister Lavinia stood at the rail and would not look up, and I noticed that she went after quietly to find Mrs. Aldous and the old gelding, and stood a long while with her gloved hand on Sergeant's honest neck, saying nothing. People are not all of a piece. Sometimes the morning's cruelest tongue is only a frightened one that learned its manners in the wrong company. I do not know what became of Lavinia Voss. I like to think the afternoon cost her something useful. The Veterans Fund, between the brothers' doubled check and the giving that broke loose across the field, once the crowd had something to be generous about, took in more that one afternoon than the Westmark Cup had raised in any 5 years before it. Mr. Penhallow told me the figure later with tears standing in his eyes, and said that the old gelding had earned every penny, and that he meant to have a small plate made for Sergeant's stall. I believe he did. As for Halloran, he came to me as the light was going long and gold across the Mews field, and the crowd had thinned, and the cup was packed away, and he was a plain man in a plain coat again with nothing to mark him as anything else. He stood at attention, the way he always did, and asked permission to return to ordinary duty. "You could have told them," I said, "at the first word this morning. You could have told me 2 years ago, the cup, the record, all of it. Why didn't you?" He thought about it the way he thought about everything slowly before he gave it. "A man who needs you to know what he was," he said at last, "hasn't finished being it, sir. I had my turn at that course. I won't get it back by telling them about it." He looked out across the empty field, at the brush and the bank and the long gallop to the birch going dark in the dusk. The old horse, though, he never had a day like today, and he had it left in him and nobody knew. That was worth letting them laugh for a morning. The corner of his mouth moved the 3rd time that day. I'd have ridden him anyway, wager or no wager. He deserved one good gallop before the years took the rest. And there it is. I have turned that morning over 100 times, the cream-breeches, the loud cruel laugh, the line that started it all, that one couldn't ride to save his life. And every time I come back to the same plain truth, the one Penhallow handed me in the steward's tent, and Halloran proved on an old children's pony in front of 3 counties. A man who has truly done a thing has nothing to prove to a man who only talks about it. The proud and the loud measure a person by the coat he wears and the noise he makes. They cannot see the quiet ones, the ones who hold all that power on a tight rein and spend none of it, until the day the quiet one decides, for an old horse's sake, never for his own, to let it go. Trooper Halloran went back to his post the next morning and stood his fence in perfect stillness and asked for nothing, and told no one. He is there still, the finest horseman I have ever served beside, in a plain coat at a quiet gait, and the men who pass him every day have not the faintest idea what they are looking at. That is the way he wants it. And I have come to understand at last that the not knowing is the whole of his honor, that the truest discipline is not the standing still, hard as that is, but the having every reason to speak and choosing, again and again, to let the cup keep his name and the world keep its silence. He won their cup 11 years ago. He gave them back something better that afternoon and never asked to be thanked for it. I have spent 19 years trying to command men. I think I learned more about it in one morning at the Mews rail than in all the rest of them put together, from a man who never raised his voice and never raised his hand, and rode an old forgotten horse into glory for no reason on this earth, but that the horse, and no one else, had earned it.